Shalom, shalom. In this video, I'm going to discuss what I found in Leviticus 15 about issues with your private areas. So the main 5 points is they're going to start off with a man with the issue, and then it's going to go to the copulation uncleanness, and then a woman that has the issue with blood, and then a man who has relations with the woman with the issue. And then it's going to end with a woman who has the issue more than her days of separation. So one thing I wanted to show you guys is starting off, it says, And Yahuwah spoke unto El Moshe and El Haran, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When any man has a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean, and this shall be his uncleanness in his his issue. Whether his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped from his issue, it is his uncleanness. And it's going to go all the way down to 14 and 15. It's going to be discussing how whatever he touches, whatever touches him, whatever he sits on, if he spits on anybody, then and that can happen if you're talking, just to let y'all know. If he spits on anybody, then they're unclean. They have to wash their clothes. If he doesn't wash his hands and touches something, then they're unclean. They have to wash their clothes, wash their body, and they'll be unclean until evening. But in verse 14 and 15, it starts saying how he has to count 7 days. After his issue is gone, he has to count 7 days, and on the 8th day he can be clean, but he has to bring in a sin offering. And then he'll, as you can see in verse 15, and the priest shall offer them, and one for a sin offering and the other one for a burnt offering, and it shall make an atonement for him for his issue. So I want to go straight to the Septuagint to show you guys what this is. So, my bad, got to start on this page. Hopefully you guys can read that. And Yah spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say to them, Whatever man shall have an issue out of his body, his issue is unclean. And this is the law of his uncleanness. Whoever has a gonorrhea out of his body, this is his uncleanness in him by reason of the issue, by which his body is affected through the issue. All the days of the issue of his body, by which his body is affected through the issue, there is his uncleanness. So, and then it's going to continue down just like in the Hebrew, but in the Septuagint it distinguishes. It says a gonorrhea. Otherwise, in the Hebrew, it just says the issue within his body. Therefore, it could be a discharge out of anywhere out of his body that would make him unclean. But gonorrhea specifically narrows it down to the sexual or the private organs. And then you go down and you see in verse 14 or 13 to 14 where it's talking about the same thing in the Hebrew, how he after his days of purification or him being clean, he's going to, after the 7 days, on the 8th day, he brings the offering to make an atonement for himself. But we continue on to the next portion where it's the copulation. That's the same in the Hebrew to the Septuagint. But whenever we go on into the onto like verse 19 to 23. Let's see. And if a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall put apart 7 days, and whosoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. And everything that she lies upon is going to go through talking about the same thing whatever she touches, XYZ, will be unclean. Whatever she sits on, whatever she lays on, or any of that, or anything that touches her is going to be unclean until evening. And then in verse 24, it discusses, if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers, if her blood be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and all the bed whereon he lies shall be unclean. And then as you can see, once it goes on to 25, it says, if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation, or if it run beyond the time of her separation, all the days of her issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. And then it starts talking just like what it did with the issue of the man, because this is extending out of it. So it's saying, if this happens, then you're going to keep the same thing until it's over. But let's see. In verse 28, but if she be cleansed of her issue, then she shall number to herself 7 days. And after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take to herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and then offer them for a sin offering, and the other one for a burnt offering, to make an atonement. That's it. And then it continues, and that's it pretty much. Yeah, that's it. But there is a, the same, just by it saying issue, in the Hebrew, it connects the woman's issue. But let's look at it in the Septuagint, because it says, okay, this is what it is for a woman with the issue, and this is what you do if the issue continues. But, all right, let's see, where are we at? I'm trying to find it, guys. All right, so in verse 25, and if a woman have an issue of blood many days, not in the time of her separation. So this pretty much chops that off and stops it, makes it something completely different. If the blood should also flow after her separation, all the days of her issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. So let's go down. So you see in verse 30, and the priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a whole burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before Yah for her unclean flux. So the unclean flux is what starts in verse 25. And if a woman has an issue of blood many days, not in the time of her separation. And this word flow is also flux. So this part from 25 to 31 is discussing the unclean flux for her. That is in verse 30. What is it, 30? Yes, verse 30. So just to give the Septuagint and the KJV, in the KJV there was an issue with the man. I'm just going to keep it on here. In the KJV there was an issue with the man. In the Septuagint it was a gonorrhea in the man. It was a sexual disease. It goes on to see the copulation, and then a woman that has the issue of blood. And then a man who lies with the woman who has an issue of blood, and how he's unclean for 7 days. And then you have the woman who has the extended issue. It doesn't necessarily say she has a disease, and so we can't necessarily speculate, but it seems as if that extended time could, and seeing how it aligns completely with the man who has a gonorrhea, but it doesn't say gonorrhea for the woman, like she also seems diseased. Now, the reason why I say that is the woman in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 20. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 20. And behold, a woman which was diseased with the issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched his tzitzits of his garment. Now, here is an issue of blood that was beyond the normal time. It was 12 years. Now, in Luke chapter 8:43, it says, and a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which spent all of her living upon physicians, neither could be healed by any. came behind him and touched the border of his garments, and immediately her issue of blood staunched. So seemingly it wasn't something normal. She had to go to physicians, and physicians heal diseases. So and that's why Mashiach always related him to himself as a physician and to the sinners as sick. But that's the reason why why I classify that over I guess time going over as a disease, because the only other explanation or only other situation with a person that has an issue that went over, it considered it a disease. All right, guys, tell me what you think. Shalom.